Hi, this is Mark from LongIslandWatch.com, and welcome to another episode of Watch and Learn. Today, we're going to be talking about dive watches, mostly the dive watch bezel and how to use it. I've got a bunch of different examples to show you. These are just two of the 8 or so watches that I have to show you. This nice Seiko, SNZH53, I believe, Orient M-Force Bravo. I got a whole bunch of other Seikos and Orients, some from my personal collection. We're going to talk about how to use the dive watch bezel. Most of us, know what they are. We might use it to time our laundry or time our pasta, but how do you use it in a dive? And I'll go over a couple different ways that you can use it. It is quite functional, and it does have a lot of history. I know there's a lot of conflicting information. There's a lot of opinions on who actually started the dive watch look and the bezel, but that doesn't really matter. We'll go over that. We'll go over decompression limits, non-decompression limits. I got a cool strap from an old watch that I could show you with the table on it. A lot of nice stuff. But before we get into looking at the watches, I guess I have to do a wrist check, right? So let's do that first. Breitling Aerospace titanium Ani-Digi, super light. And then I'm wearing my father's Datejust tapestry dial, two-tone. So before we get into the video and talking about the watches, I want to talk about diving in general, because the biggest misconception that I hear from people and that I've always heard is that, and this is the way I learned it originally, is that the bezel is used to time how much air is left in your tank. And that's not true. There's no such thing as, a timer for how much air is left in your tank. It depends on a lot of factors. Tanks have pressure gauges, and that's how you know how much air is left, but it's not a timer. It doesn't say you have 6 minutes, you have 10 minutes, you have 20 minutes. And you generally don't dive, getting back to surface with no air left in your tank. There's always a nice reserve. So that whole conception is wrong. And there's 3 major factors that determine how long you can dive on, say a standard, whatever it is, 80 cubic feet of air. You don't realize this, but if you're a scuba diver, and you know it obviously, but when you put a tank on your back, it's basically just a pressurized bomb, just hopefully in a good container that won't explode. You take in, 80 cubic feet of air, I believe, and you're stuffing it into a tank, this big. It's pressurized to a few thousand PSI, but they're designed well, hopefully by the engineers that did them, and they don't burst. But if they go off, if you ever watched, I think Mythbusters did something, they go off like rockets. There's 3 major factors. It's how deep you're going to dive. It's, are you going to make decompression stops when you're coming back up to the surface? And most importantly, your physical ability. I scuba dove once. I loved it. I did it many years ago, about 15 years ago. It was a great experience. I went out with 4 people and a couple of instructors, and they had said to us, depending on how well you breathe, or how slowly you breathe and how calm you are, you'll all get different times, and we'll just tap you on the shoulder when it's your time to come back up to the surface. We went out with 4 people, and I don't know, I was having fun, and eventually I looked around, and there was nobody there except the instructors, and I look up, and I see all their feet bobbing in the surface, because they were all done. I hadn't even entered the yellow zone yet on my tank. Not that I'm a great diver, but I was young, hopefully I still am young, fit, I breathe easy. So there's a lot of factors. So you can't just say, we got 30 minutes left in this tank. That's not the way it works. It's all based on the pressure gauge. I'm not wearing a dive watch. What the dive watch bezel is going to do, it's going to help you keep track of everything, stick to your dive plan, how much time you spend, what your bottom time is, what your ascent time is, decompression stops, etc. Anyway, like I said, I'm not a diver. I did it once, but I think I have a fairly good understanding of everything. And if you do have any comments, I'll say it later, but put them down below and tell everyone your experiences, because I do love to read it all, and I think a lot of people like to read the comments too. Anyway, so let's get over to the table and check out dive watches. So in front of you here, I have 3 dive watches. You may recognize them all: the Rolex Submariner, Seiko White Knight, which is from my personal collection, and an Orient Blu-ray 2. And if you look at the bezels, you'll notice that the classic Rolex bezel has the minute markings from just the 0 to the 15, and then the rest of the bezel is marked in 5-minute increments. And then when you get to the Seiko, this White Knight, also the 007, which I have one floating around here somewhere. Yeah, I do. I have a whole bunch of watches here, by the way, a lot of Seikos, a lot of Orients. You'll see that the bezel is marked in 1 minute increments all around. And then if you pull up the Orient, just for comparison, so the Orient is marked like the Rolex, 0 to 15 only, and then the rest of the bezel is 5 and 10 minute increments. Now, this kind of marking philosophy on the bezel is really a styling holdover from when these watches were first released, original divers, like the Rolex. And a lot of these companies basically just followed the look. I don't want to say they copied it. I know there's a lot of discrepancies about who invented the dive watch or whatever, but really in everyone's mind, or at least most people's mind, it's Rolex that kind of invented this look. I'm not going to speculate, or the Blancpain maybe did it first. It doesn't matter. But this 0 to 15 just became iconic, and then sometimes a 0 to 20. And I'll pull up just a whole bunch of watches and just to show them to you. Because I know a lot of times you guys like to see watches in the Watch and Learn. So this is the SNZF17. They call this the Sea Urchin, the Seiko 5. This one is marked from 0 to 20 on the bezel. See that? Orient Black Mako, 0 to 10 markings, and then 5 and 10s all around. I showed you the 007, marked in minutes all around. It's a nice one. This is like a 50 fathoms kind of homage. This Seiko SNZH53 comes in black, blue, just like a lot of these other watches, they come in black and blue. This isn't even marked in minutes. This is all marked in 5s and 10s. This is actually one of my favorite watches in the Seiko 5 lineup. I love this piece, obviously because it's blue, but the bezel is coated with that clear coating, and it just really pops and shines. But the point to take home here is that there are no minute markings, so you don't get a good feel for elapsed time, in my opinion. And then the last one is an Orient M-Force, another ISO-rated diver like the Seiko 007 and the White Knight. 1 minute increments, and then 0 to 20 is in this orangish color, and the rest of it is in white. So I did talk before a little bit about diving and time underwater and how all that works. Now let's do a quick example, to put it all into perspective. The way the bezel is meant to be used, I guess, really is a matter of personal preference. I thought I knew how to use a dive bezel, and then I went to research for the video, and it turns out the way I thought you use it is correct. But then what I also learned, and what I really liked about it, a lot of people use it however the heck they want to use it. There's no rule book. You use it however it works for you. What I read that a lot of divers said is that once you're underwater, things go crazy. You may not remember your timing and how many minutes you allotted for a certain thing. So this is all a good backup. Nothing beats a good dive plan and knowing how long you're going to be in certain areas and how long you expect to be on the bottom for, bottom time and ascent time. So the way it's meant to be used is the first thing you're going to do is you're going to set the triangle, the 0 marker, to the minute hand when you're just ready to go down, because bottom time starts from the second your head goes under the water till you begin your final ascent to the surface. So you're in the water and you're ready to dive. So now what I just did in open air here with 2 hands, you do when you're just about to go under the water. So you're wearing gloves, more than likely, and you don't have 2 hands. You only have 1 hand because it's on your wrist. So a good comment that I pulled from one of the articles, somebody had said that the more the bezel is guarded against accidental movement, the harder it is to use, with gloves and possibly underwater. So like the Omega Pro Prof, where you have to press the button and turn it, it's cool and it works great, but you need 2 hands to do it. So, the uni-directional bezel, where it only turns counterclockwise, 1 turn clockwise, I'm trying to turn it. The uni-directional bezel is great because you can operate it with 1 hand, and if you do accidentally turn it, as I'll show you, you won't, you have no harm to yourself. So let's say you started your dive, you go underwater, as I've been talking, and time has elapsed. So you can see about 1 minute has already elapsed because the orange hand, the minute hand, is now pointing to the first dot after the marker. Pointing at that dot, so that's 1 minute. So as time elapses, obviously the minute hand will go, and you can quickly read at a glance how many minutes you have so far into your dive. So let's fast forward now and say that you've been at the bottom you've been doing, let's say you've been doing 20 minutes. So I'm just going to fast forward time a little bit, and there we go. And now time is still ticking away. We can look at our watch now and know that it's 20 minutes, and maybe now it's time for us to start our final ascent. And then once you start your final ascent, time will keep going. Now here's where a lot of people differ on how they like to use it. What some people like to do, especially if they're doing decompression stops, is they will now reset the bezel. And this is your new 0. So 20 minutes has elapsed. And now I can see, again, I'm starting a fresh count for my decompression stops, and I can see when 1 minute has passed, when 2 minutes has passed. I didn't have to move the triangle. I could have just kept it exactly where it was, but I'd have to remember where I was and how many minutes have elapsed since that point. Again, I'm not a diver. I don't know what goes through divers' heads. I have done it. It is exciting, but I do know that, your mind is, maybe if you're a seasoned diver, your mind's not on a lot of things, but I'm sure there's a lot going on. You got to keep track of a lot of different things, and maybe you'd forget, was it at 22? Was it at 21? How many minutes have I been here? This is something that, you reset it to 0, it works perfect. And that's where the Rolex bezel comes into play. Same thing. This probably isn't running. 1 second, wind her up. She is currently out of the rotation, my Submariner, and I only have winders for like 3 or 4 watches, so she is stopped. Anyway, so let's say this was the Rolex, and here's my minute hand. If I was starting my ascent, I can reset the triangle to the 0, and then I can read off how many minutes have elapsed. Now, if I had started my dive 20 minutes ago, let's say, and I'm going to start my ascent and I want to time decompression stops, I guess I could, but I don't know. When has 1 minute elapsed or 2 minutes elapsed? It's not an easy read. Yeah, you could do it, but it's not as simple as if the bezel was marked every minute like the ISO divers are. Like this Orient or, again, the venerable 007. Every minute is marked, so you can easily see at a glance how much time has elapsed. But not to knock the Rolex, obviously. They are doing something right, and people still use them, although I'm sure a lot of people use a cheap digital watch to dive as well. And then just something that I did find in a drawer, I'm sure a lot of people have these if you don't have them memorized. I found a strap with the no decompression time limits on them. And this is really cool. A lot of dive watches that we used to sell had them. And this is so the diver can tell at a glance what depth and time, maximum depths and maximum times that you can stay at those depths and not have to decompress. So you have your depth in meters and how long you can stay there without having to go into decompression steps. So you're going to start more like, depth of, say, 27 meters. You can stay there, so it's 90 feet. You can stay there for 30 minutes without decompression, and so forth and so on. I don't know what these are based off of. I know the tables have changed many times over the years from, decades ago. As we learn more about the human body and what it can withstand. A decompression stop is basically, if you're at a certain depth, you come up to another depth that's shallower and you stay there for a minute or 2 minutes or 4 minutes. And this is how you prevent the bends, bubbling of the gas in your blood, all that bad stuff. And that's why divers do all this. So you get to the surface, you break the surface, and you can see how long you were diving for. And that's it. So like I said, it is simple. I did read that some people just set the triangle once and forget it, and that way they can see how long they've been underwater. Some people reset it. Some people use it totally different. I was reading, and you can do this however you want to do it. Let's say that that you're going to have bottom time. Now again, bottom time is from when you first go down to when you start coming right back up. So let's say you want to have bottom time of 30 minutes and you're going to allow yourself, say, 10 or 15 minutes for the ascent. So if you're going to allow yourself 30 minutes of bottom time, what they'll do is they will put the triangle 30 minutes ahead. So I'll put the hand at 30. So after 30 minutes, this comes around to 0, and I could start my ascent and I can time my ascent steps. Basically the same thing we did before, but kind of pre-planning for it. And again, what I like about this whole thing, and I'll keep saying it, you can use it however you want to use it. However it works for you is perfect. And you could be timing laundry, you could be timing pasta, as most of us probably are doing. You could put your interesting uses for the timer, for the bezel timer at the bottom. But that's what most people do use it for. Now let's talk a little bit about unidirectional and what it means. So let's set it back to 0. Let's use it the way I originally described. We start our dive and we go under the water. And let's say 5 minutes have elapsed, okay? So I'm going to advance the time 5 minutes. Okay. And now let's say we accidentally brush against something and it wants to turn the bezel clockwise. The bezel won't turn. That's good. Now let's say we brush against something and we accidentally brush it counterclockwise. So all that's happened now is that you think you're under the water for 10 minutes. You've really only been under the water for 5 minutes. So that's good. You foreshorten your dive for 5 minutes, sure, but you didn't lengthen it for 5 minutes inadvertently. That would be bad, especially if you're planning a certain amount of time for your entire dive. You don't want to make it longer than you had intended for various reasons. Obviously, running out of air might be one of them, but just a lot of different things, planning your decompression steps along the way back up. That's where the unidirectional bezel comes in handy. Now, of course, you could turn it all the way over an hour and you could really, muck yourself up. And I guess you could make your dive longer if you turned it 58 minutes, but 62 minutes or whatever. But that's not going to happen. It's really just against the accidental movement that would brush against it. And that's where unidirectional bezels, are very important. You cannot lengthen your time. You can only foreshorten it or think you're under longer than you actually are. So where does that leave watches like this? I have no minute graduations whatsoever. You can still use it. It works fine. It's still only unidirectional. But you just don't get that refinement. And I guess we'll be honest, first of all, this isn't a diver. It's only 100 meters water resistant. I mean, you could use it to do snorkeling. You should not bring it to scuba diving. But these are mostly desk divers, all of these. At least, if not in design, in usual use, most of us are not diving with them. We're just, we like the look. But it's nice to know actually how they do work. In another watch and learn in the future, I'll pop maybe a couple of bezels off and we'll see how they work and how they maintain their unidirectional spinning. But I didn't want to put that in here. I didn't want to muddy the waters. I wanted to keep this video focused all on how to use the dive watch bezel because it's probably the most common bezel out there and definitely the one that most people can certainly relate to. So this has been Mark from LongIslandWatch.com with Watch and Learn, showing you how to use a dive bezel. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to our channel if you have not done so yet. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down below. Maybe tell us how you use a dive bezel. I do enjoy reading the comments. In the compass bezel episode, I did make a mistake and somebody did alert me to the fact. And after reading a bit more on it, so I was wrong. So I really like that. We all have something to learn. And until next time, thank you for watching.